All right, so here in Basic 7, we're going to be doing our desktops class, and a desktop is going to be a vital portion of your program that is going to make you a lot more efficient. It's going to make your time more valuable in the program because you're going to spend less time searching for books, opening and closing books. You're going to spend less time setting up things the way you want them to be. It's going to just always have those things set up so that way when you go to use them, they're ready to be used. So it's going to make you a lot more efficient in the program when we use the desktop functionality. When we talk about a desktop is exactly that. It's the top of a desk. It's what you're seeing on your screen. And it's you setting up the books and functions exactly how you want them and where you want them so that they're always there when you go to use them. And you can think about it just kind of like your regular desk. You probably have your mouse set at a certain spot and your keyboard set at a certain spot and your monitor at a certain spot. It's the same idea. We're just setting up our desk of books with how we want to use them. And then we're able to go back to that desk over and over and over again whenever we want to do the same thing again. So every desktop that we create is going to have a very specific purpose. That specific purpose can range from a type of study to studying a specific book or author or a book of the Bible or studying maybe for a certain thing like a sermon series, or it's going to have a specific purpose, whatever it is. Maybe a type of study, word study, or topical study. It's going to have a specific purpose, whatever you create. You may come up with some other ideas for that I didn't mention, and that's okay as well. Lots of different ideas. Any desktop you're using on a regular basis is a good desktop, though, in my opinion. If you go to it frequently and you don't have to set it up, that's exactly what the purpose of it is to save you time, save you that energy. So we will start out here with the basics of desktop. We're going to talk about how to create a desktop, the basics of loading a desktop, and the basics of managing your desktops. Okay, that's what we're going to start with here. So to create a desktop, we're going to use the desktop icon, and the first option on there is Create Desktop. All right, so we can click on that. When we do, it's going to ask us for the name of the desktop that we want to create. You want to make it descriptive. The better that you can know what this desktop does by just that title, the better that desktop's going to be. So we are going to name it. I'm just going to put sample here today so I know to delete it later. And then we have two choices. These choices are the difference between using a coloring book and using a canvas, in my opinion. The first option is settings from the current desktop. And then what it's going to do is it's going to take everything on the desktop that you're currently looking at, which in this case for me is the My Desktop. It's going to take everything from that desktop and copy it into the new desktop that you're creating. That's going to be all of your settings. That's going to be things like your Verse Explorer. That's going to be any books or windows that you already have open. It's going to include all of that into that new desktop that you're creating. This works great when you already have like a basic outline or template on a desktop that you want to duplicate. For example, I was studying the book of Ruth and was doing a sermon series on that, so I went through that for, I think it was like 12 weeks or whatever. When I finished with that, I went right to the book of Esther. A lot of the books, a lot of the functionality that I was using is going to be the exact same, so I just duplicated my Ruth one and then kind of converted it over to an Esther one. Saved me some time in the process because I didn't have to go find every book from scratch. I was able to use the ones that were already open that I wanted to use, and they were already there. So that's like coloring in the lines. You're just kind of adjusting it a little bit to fit exactly what you need. The second option is an empty desktop, and it's going to give you a completely blank canvas to paint on. It means that you will have no settings set. You'll have to set all the settings up again for like the Verse Explorer and things like that. You'll have to start from scratch. Nothing will be opened on it. It's a blank slate. I actually like starting with this. This is my actual one I usually like to start with, unless it's a very rare occasion. I will usually start with a blank slate because I like to be able to set up that Verse Explorer and everything for the first time. I like to customize those things. So if you're going to just use a generic version of it anyways, it wouldn't really matter as much. So we'll create an empty desktop here. And you can see as soon as I do, up in the top left-hand corner, it changes it from where it said My Desktop to where it says now Sample. And it now says Sample because that's the name of what I just named it. So we are now in our new desktop that we're creating. So as we're creating the desktop, all you have to do is open what you want to use and set up what you want to use. It will automatically save as you do it. So if I open up my Bible, it saves. If I open up another Bible, it saves. If I open up the commentary, it saves. If I open up the parallel Bible, it saves. If I open up the Verse Explorer, it saves. You get the idea. Every time I'm doing anything, it's saving. If I even just change the chapter, it saves. It's automatically saving at every point of the desktop to have the most current and accurate desktop at all times. So if I close a book, guess what it does? It saves. It's going to save every time anything is done inside of that desktop. So it saves a lot, obviously. It's just going to keep saving over and over and over again. And that's great because it's going to make sure that you always have the most accurate desktop. But at the same time, especially as we're beginning to use desktops, that can be a little frustrating because you may end up messing up something. I may close this Bible and not mean to, and then I'll have to go and reopen it and reorganize my screen and everything like that. Or even if someone else uses your computer, they may not know how to use desktops. There's those things that happen where maybe, you just don't mean. Sometimes I get a phone call and I forget I'm in a desktop. For me, it's usually in a class. I'll forget that I'm in a certain desktop and I'll mess it up. So it will automatically save at all points. There's no save button or anything like that. It just saves for you, okay? So that is our first option. That's creating desktops. And we'll kind of go through the principles of creating desktops. I mean, obviously, that's just the basic of this is what you do. But we'll talk about the principles here as we go through the creation of the simple desktop in this class. The second option on that list is the Manage Desktop. All right, Manage Desktops is where we get to delete desktops that we're no longer using. Two things real quick. You can never delete the My Desktop. You can see here, it won't let me delete it. It's always got to be there. It is a generic desktop that we keep there because you have to have at least one desktop in your program. But as well, because a lot of times it gives you a desktop to do just kind of anything in. You don't have a specific purpose for that desktop. And so you can use it as the kick around desktop. You can use it as the I'm not sure what I want to do, so I'm going to open up books desktop. It can be kind of a generic one that you can use. You can also never delete the desktop that you're currently in. So I cannot delete this sample desktop right now because I'm currently in it as well. All right. Now, as we talk about the principles of deleting desktops, why would you want to delete desktops? I find that if I haven't used a desktop in a month or so, usually I'm okay to delete it. I want my list to be slim and trim when I'm loading my desktops because the faster I can figure out which desktop I'm using, the faster that I can get into using that desktop. If I have to read through 50 different titles and say, well, is it this one that says Old Testament Word Study, or is it this one that says Old Testament Word Study, Pentateuch, which one am I, that's just taking too much time then. And I maybe have divided myself up a little bit too precisely. So I'm trying to be a little bit more accurate in my description so that way I can get in a lot faster. And again, I find that I don't use much more than 8 to 12 anyways. So to have 40, 50 on there, some people just keep making them and making them. Eventually I delete the ones that I don't use, all right? So I will delete them, keep my list slim and trim, 8 to 12. Now the very bottom of our desktop icon has all of our desktops listed, and this is where we get to load them. So once I'm done with the desktop, say I was done with this sample desktop, I wanted to use my Thompson chain reference. I would go click on the Thompson chain reference one. I don't close anything down or anything. I just change which desk I'm looking at. It brings in on the conveyor belt this Thompson chain reference desk. I'm reading this Thompson chain reference desk. I'm using it. When I'm done with that, maybe I want to do a word study in the Old Testament. So I'll go to my Old Testament word study one. And it will load all the books that I use for that. And when I'm done with that one, maybe I need to go back and I need to illustrate a sermon. And so it'll go now and it'll load all the stuff that I'm doing for that. You don't close anything down when you're using desktops. You're just changing which desk you're looking at and leaving everything open up on that desk so you can get back to it later on if you want to. All right, so I'm going to go back to My Desktop real quick here now. And I'm going to manage my desktops, and I'm going to delete that sample one that we just created because I don't need that anymore. You can see that, and I can delete it then. So I just keep my list on the bottom slim and trim, and I'm just going to change to whichever desk is going to suit my study needs at that present moment. When I'm done, I just change back to a different desk over and over again. All right? Any questions here about the creation, managing, or loading of desktops? All right. So I mentioned that one of the things about desktops that can be frustrating is that, especially as we first start getting used to using it, is a lot of times we maybe close books on accident, or even like I said, if someone calls you with an emergency, you just start opening books up to find the answer, and then by the time you finish, you realize he messed up a desktop. You know, that happens a lot to me sometimes. So if it's a desktop that you've created, a lot of times maybe you'll be able to recreate it really easy. But sometimes if you've watched, you know, a Steven video or maybe one that I've taught you myself, or even it was a really complex one that you came up with and you don't remember quite where everything went, and it's a lot of work to go back and recreate those. And so we have a second function available here in the desktop's drop-down menu called templates, which are manually saved backups of your desktops. It's like taking a picture of your desk so that you can move everything back right where you want it. When I was younger, I still do it, but I love to take apart electronics. I love to break electronics, honestly. But my wife and I bought 3 arcade machines, and they're all Pac-Man because I love Pac-Man. So one of them was a baby Pac-Man machine, and it is a really complex machine. It was half arcade, half pinball. Very weird, and it wasn't working when we bought it, and I knew that, so I was going to fix it. And so I took it apart, and as I was taking it apart, I took all these pictures to know where everything gets plugged back in. And when I went to put it back together, then later on I could look at the pictures and see where it was plugged back in. There were a few pictures I forgot to take, though, and so I had to kind of guess at those things, which made it very difficult to get it right, and I did not get it right the first 10, 20, 30 times. So templates are kind of like those pictures that I took. They're giving me a visual representation of what it once looked like so I can go back to it if I want to. And that's exactly what we're going to do here with our templates. We're going to take manual pictures and say, okay, at this point, this is what this desktop looked like, so I can go back to it if ever I have a problem, if ever I close a book or delete a book or whatever, I can go back to it really easily without having to watch another video again or write it down. So we're going to go to this Old Testament word study one. We're going to mess it up, all right? And I'm going to just mess it up in the most easy way that I know possible. I don't use this as much anymore because I used to use it all the time, but there's an exit down here on the file drop-down menu, and right above it is close all. And sometimes I'd get a little click on the click, and I'd close all before I hit exit. And it'd close everything down, and so now my Old Testament word study is empty. If I go to another desktop, of course, we'll go to this Thompson Chain Reference, and I'm going to come back to Old Testament word study. It, of course, is going to be empty because I closed everything, and it automatically saved as soon as I did. So again, I could go through and I could recreate it by hand if I wanted, or I can look at the picture that I took of it and use that picture. So we're going to start with that. We're going to come up here. We're going to load template to current desktop. I'm going to find the desktop that matches. Here it is, Old Testament word study. I always name mine the exact same so I know that they connect. Click load. And it will automatically load those books right back to that last place that I took a picture at. So it might not be the exact location in the books that I was in. I maybe wasn't studying Numbers 3:3. Maybe I was studying something else, but it took me back to the last time I took that picture, which means all those books were there. So anytime I make a major change in a desktop, I'm usually taking another picture, taking another template, so I can access it again later on with that new change in it. So if I wanted to change this desktop, say I don't need the ESV on there, and I want that to be a permanent change on my templates, okay? All I'm going to do is go up to my desktops. Now I'm going to go to Create Template this time. And all it does is it asks you for a name. And again, I always name mine the same thing, so I'm going to name this one Old Testament Word Study. It'll ask me if I want to overwrite because I already have one. And in this case, I'll hit yes. And now that is my new template. That is my new picture that I took of that desktop. So if I go to load it now, it will load it with only the one Bible available inside of it. So really easy to make, really easy to use. All right. Now, our last option here involving templates here is the Manage of Templates. If you click on it, it's just like the Manage of Desktops. The only thing you can do in here is delete them. And you can, of course, delete any ones that you want or that you're not using anymore. But I actually don't delete my templates as often as I do my desktops. When we talk about loading desktops, I load desktops probably 5 to 10 times a day minimum, okay? Especially when I'm doing a big study or something like that, it'll be a dozen times, sometimes really easy in an hour. I'll be flipping back and forth between desktops. When I'm using templates, though, I'm not messing those things up. It's like once or twice a month. So I don't mind if that list is really long because I'm not using it very often. So I will use this not only as a backup for current desktops, but I also will use it like as a repository or a filing cabinet for older desktops that maybe I'm not currently using anymore. And I have a lot of sermon series listed in here. You can see there's like an Ephesians and Elijah. There's a Samson on there. There's the Ruth and the Esther. Those are all old sermon series that I did that I'm no longer using. And unless somebody calls and asks me a question about a sermon that they listened to online or something like that, more than likely I'm not going to ever use it again. But I kept it there just in case I ever need to use it again. And even as well, we talked about maybe needing a, starting with something from scratch or starting from something already. If I needed one that was very similar to Esther, maybe I was going to do Judges or something like that, and they use the same books, I wouldn't have to then start from scratch. I have this one that's already kind of been created. So if I was going to use one of these older ones that is just like a repository or a filing cabinet for one that I don't actually have on my normal list, all I have to do is I have to go first to the create. I'm going to name it. In this case, I'm just going to name it sample again. There's no reason to name it anything else. It helps me to remember to delete it. And then I'm going to choose actually an empty desktop again. All right. And say now somebody called and asked me about that Elijah desktop, right? I could come up here and I can load a template on this empty one, which is called Elijah Study here. And it will put the things there that I was using and I can have them there. All right. When I'm done, again, because it's not one I would need to maybe actively use, I can come change desktops again. And I can delete that desktop because I don't need to actively get to it all the time. And if I do need to load it again, I can just go back to templates again and where it's saved, and it's always going to be. So you can use that templates not only as a backup for active ones, but you can use it kind of like as a filing cabinet for older ones that maybe you'll want to go back to. Maybe it's one that you don't use often enough, but maybe it's one you use like every 3 months because you have a special service or something like that, and you want to be able to go back to it every 3 months. Maybe then you want to just save it in the templates and come back to it, when you need it actually, instead of having it loaded there at all times. Any questions here about our templates? All right, so that is the basics of desktop creation and template usage in our program. Now we're going to walk through the creation of a very basic desktop here. It's a devotional desktop meant for like kind of personalized study. It's going to give you some of the principles of desktop as well so that you understand kind of what you're trying to do in each window and how you handle windows and stuff like that. So we will walk through kind of some of the thought processes behind it as we go through. So if you'd like to minimize my go to training screen right now, bring up your own word search. You can walk through the creation of it with me. If you'd rather just watch, of course, and then come back to the video later on, you can do that as well and build it off the video if you would like to. Once you have your own word search opened up, the first thing that we want to do is we want to go to that desktop icon. Click on the Create Desktop, that first option on there. We're just going to name this one a very simple Devotions. So you can type in Devotions. And then we're going to choose the second option, an empty desktop. So we have a blank canvas to paint on. And once you've done that, you can go ahead and click on the OK button, and that will create your new desktop. I cannot do that because I already have that one. Let me delete that one. All right, we'll try again here. There we go. Now I've got it. So you should as well be able to see in the top left-hand corner, it should say Devotions next to Word Search 12. Now, once we get into there, all we have to do is start opening up our books and functions that we want to use. So the first book that we're going to open, we're going to go to our library tab. Inside the library tab, we're going to go to the devotionals folder. And then you're just going to open up 3 devotionals. Does not matter to me which ones, but you're going to pick 3 devotionals to open up. Before you click, though, on the right-hand side, make sure where it says switch to study tab after opening a book, make sure that is unchecked. We do not want that checked. So I'll open up my 3 here. If you're looking for a really good one too, there's this cool one that we have called Sparkling Gems from the Greek. And it's a really cool one. I think that it's a really easy way to get into Greek and learn about Greek, which I really enjoy. So it's kind of like little snippets on Greek each day. Now we know, of course, from our classes, we know that has been open. All those books opened up on the study tab. They opened up all in the same window. Because that's how the program functions. But we can go back and look at the study tab real quick if you wanted to. And you can see that all 3 books are opened up there in the study tab together. Now, when we talk about our program, we have roughly about 70 different book categories. We have 20 functions. If you start opening up one of everything, you're going to end up with 90-something windows in the program. So a big part of creating desktops is grouping things together that can be grouped together. Now, not always can things be grouped together, but a lot of times there are similar books in different categories that work well together. So we're going to open up a book right now. If you want to use the fast open on your icon toolbar, go ahead and click on the fast open. And we're going to type in a book called Practice of the Presence of God. So you can just type in the word practice. It should come up on the list. It's by Brother Lawrence. It is a Christian classic. If you have not already read it, I would recommend reading it. It is a really good book. And it's going to open up in its own window because it is a literature book. All right. But if you think about it honestly, when was the last time when you were reading a literature book that you said, you know what, I need to compare this to my devotional? I'm going to bet never. So that means that we could probably merge those together because you're never needing to read both of these books at the exact same time. It's not like a commentary in the Bible where you're comparing them. It's not like where you're seeing an outline of a sermon and you're looking at the Bible at the same time. Those things you need to see at the same time. Devotionals, literature books, they work really well together. So we're going to use our docking tool that we learned about in Basics 2. We're going to left click and hold on the docking tool inside of the Practice of the Presence of God, drag it into the first window that we created with the devotionals in it, okay? So go ahead and left click on the docking tool, drag it into the other window and drop it, and it will merge those 2 windows together. That is one of the most important things that you can start to learn here is grouping things together that go together. One of my, I think the things that I struggle most when helping customers, or I watch customers do the most, I struggle with because I know that so many people do it and don't know any better, is they have 20, 30, 40 windows opened up and they got these little tiny windows that they're trying to read from and they get frustrated and it's so hard. And I'm like, you just need to merge some things together. Just use the docking tool. So a lot of that will be kind of your own critical thinking. You'll think through and say, hey, does this go with this or does this go with this? And you can kind of picture where each thing goes. Because just like every desktop has its own specific purpose, every window we create in that desktop is going to have a specific purpose. So nothing is going to be accidental in what we're doing. Everything has a reason, and we're going to use it specifically for that purpose, okay? So let's open up a second window now. We're going to open up our Bible window. So just go ahead and click on the Bible button that we set up in Basics 1. Click on it, and it's going to open up your favorite Bible translation. Now I'm going to teach you a shortcut key here. When we are opening up books, we do have the ability to kind of force them where we want them to go based on using some shortcut keys. We don't have to use that docking tool if we don't want to, okay? So right now you've got your Bible opened up. It should be your active window. If it's not your active window, and again, we know it's our active window because it's got a blue title bar. If it's not your active window, click anywhere in it to make it the active window, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to hold the control button on our keyboard and click on the parallel Bible up on the main icon toolbar, okay? So push and hold the control button, click on the parallel Bible, and it's actually going to force the parallel Bible into the regular Bible window. Usually the parallel Bible would open up separately and it has its own window. Instead, it will merge it together here and they will have one window together. Because again, when I'm thinking of my Bible and I'm thinking of my parallel Bible has usually my favorite translation on it. It is made up of the 5 translations I use the most. I usually don't need to look at them simultaneously, so I can merge them into the same window together. So again, that's me critically thinking about how I use it. Now you may say later on, hey Rick, I don't use it that way and it doesn't work for me. But I wanted to show you that you can use that control button. That control button will always force whatever book you're opening up in, whatever, it doesn't do functions, of course, because functions don't merge together, but whatever book category you're using, if you want to merge it into the one that you've already got active and open, all you have to do is hit the control button. So watch, I'm going to go, I'll just show us an example here. I'm going to go to the library, and I'm going to open up a cross-reference book first, and then I'm going to open up history and culture, and I'm going to hold the control button the whole time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. When I go back to that study tab, oh, actually that was a very bad example because the cross-reference one won't work. Let me try that again. Boop, 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 boop. It merged them all in with the devotionals because that's where it could merge it. You can't merge with cross-references. That was a bad choice. Let's try this denomination book. I got my denomination book opened up. There it is. Now I'm going to go back to history and culture. I'm going to open them all up right there too. All right, control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see it opened them all up inside of that denominational window, even though that's not where they normally would go. The control button will always merge things together, okay? You can use that inside the resource panel. You can use that inside the library tab. You can use that inside the fast open. Any of those places, you can use the control button and it will automatically force it into whatever your active window is. Now we have a second shortcut key, which is the shift button. If control bonds together, the shift is the separator. The shift is the one that makes everybody not want to hang out together, okay? So I can hold the shift button right now. I've got a Bible window already opened up. But if I hold the shift button, I can open up 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can open up all the Bible windows I want where they will all be separate by holding the shift button. So control brings together, shift separates. Okay, so those are your shortcut keys. Those will come in really handy whenever you're taking one of our more intermediate advanced classes and we're going a lot faster and we say, hey, here are the 10 books to open up and put in this window. You can just hold the control button, find each book as you go, and it goes a lot faster. So those are our 2 shortcut keys, control and shift. Does anybody have any questions about the first 2 windows that we've created or those shortcut keys that I just gave you? All right, then we're going to jump now to our third window, which is the helps window is what I call it. It usually houses things like study Bibles and commentaries and survey books, things that are going to give me help to my normal reading of the Bible. If I don't know what it's going to say, what it's saying, this is what it'll tell me. So I'm going to start off by just opening up my default commentary, and that's where you can start as well. Just click on your default commentary, and we're going to talk a little bit about limitations here inside of the desktops. When we're doing desktops, I'm going to give you a generic number of 20 to 25 books and functions that you can open up inside of your program, each desktop. That's a generic number, okay? For some people, that might be pushing it. If you have a really old computer that can barely, handle Windows 10, that might be too many, all right? You got a brand new computer that just fell off the line, you might be able to open up 30, 40 books. A lot depends on how fast your computer is, how much memory it has, and most importantly, how patient you are, all right? The more patient you are, I will tell you the more things you can usually put on a desktop. If you're a very impatient person and you have not been praying for that fruit of the Spirit to be growing in you and you're just not there yet, you want to put as few books as possible, because the more books you put on there, man, it's going to take that much longer to load. And if you start canceling things as they're loading, you will start erroring your desktops and they will start having errors and no longer working. So you got to be patient when you're loading these desktops if you've got a lot of things added on. And Stephen will push that. If you watch any of Stephen's classes, Stephen will push, 30, 40 books on a desktop sometimes. And sometimes customers' computers can't handle that. So I'd encourage you to pay attention to your own computer. If it's going really, really slow when loading a desktop, you might want to remove a few books off of it. All right, if it's taking too long and you're getting impatient, remove a few books off of it. But why I tell you that at this point is that when we're using our Bible, our topical books, and our commentaries, we set up those carousels in Basics 1 and 2, got them all prepared. Now we're going to make sure we use them, okay? I do not need to open up tab after tab after tab of my favorite commentaries because of the fact that I have them all in my carousel. I have my 17 favorite commentaries in my carousel. Maybe I want 1 or 2 tabs because that way I can see maybe 2 of them at a time. But I don't need all 17 of them opened up, taking up every book available to me on my desktop. Instead, I'm going to use my carousel, and then it only counts as 1 book, meaning I can open up that many more things. I can use my other tabs for unique books or books that I don't usually use. Or maybe if I'm doing a specific study of the Bible, I can use it for a very specific commentary. I can be very personalized then in it, without just opening up the same 17 books on every desktop. So use that carousel. It's always there. We've got those 3 of them. Use them. Don't open up all your books. Use them. A lot of times in something like even like this helps window, maybe I'd open up the ISBE. I'm gonna do that here. ISBE. And we're gonna use the revise. I'm gonna hold Control again, and it's gonna put it in there. So my helps has now a dictionary and a commentary in there. And again, now I've got both my commentary carousel and my topical carousel there to use together, and it's only counting as 2 books on my desktop. So make sure that you're going through and you're using those carousels, because if you're not, you're going to end up spending all of your time just looking at the same 17 books over and over and over again, okay? So we're going to leave this one as it is. That one will be one that you can personalize later on and put your favorite books in there or some unique books that maybe you don't use very often. But it'll give you a chance to really personalize that one yourself, because that's usually one that I think people do personalize when we're talking about it is the helps area. So now as we're looking at our different options of what we can do here, we know how to add books in there, and books are pretty simple. I want to talk to you a little bit about the functionalities and the different functions that work inside of a desktop permanently. Now, every function will work on a desktop. It just won't stay open permanently, where if you load that desktop later on, it's still there, okay? So let's talk about the things that will permanently stay open on desktops and what won't. So let's go through the toolbar together. We've got our concordance search. That will not. It's a pop-up window, so it will not stay on a desktop. You have to open that every time you want to use it. Same if you were doing search results and you had that opened, it would not save your search results where you go back to it each time. The topical and the cross-reference explorer, they will stay open, and you can leave them open as long as you follow my rules that we learned about in Basics 4. Remember, we learned that if you set them to a collection, make it a collection that's a little smaller, or make sure that you are patient when loading. Again, there's that P word, patience. Make sure you are patient when loading your desktop if you have them on there, so that way that they will not have any problems. We then have our Verse Explorer, which will stay open, not to a specific verse, but it will stay open, the function itself. Instant Verse Study and Lesson Maker both will not. They are both pop-up windows, so they will not stay open. When we talk about our information entry functions, Bible Notes will not, and either will any of your OneDrive documents. Neither of those will stay open on a desktop, but user books, verse list, word processor, sermons, illustrations, database, and note stack functions all will stay open. And if in the case of user books and word processor and Verseless, it'll stay open to a specific document or whatever. It'll stay open to that specific one if you want to. So you can just have it always open up to that one that you have. Let's scroll down. Obviously, Parallel Bible will. The Lexicon Explorer will not. You can't. I mean, it won't stay open. And again, we talked about that in Basics 1 anyways. It's not really an icon that we need to use anyways because we're usually just double-clicking on our original language word to get to it anyways. So we don't really need that icon anyways. The Morph Explorer will stay open, but not to a specific word. You'll have to go to the specific word each time. The web browser will stay open, but not to a specific web page. And then we already talked about the secondary display. You can't use that as part of desktops. You can also leave open, we talked about one other function, the word definition function. That one will stay open as well if you want to leave that open. So here in this devotional one, a lot of times this is where I think, again, a lot of personalization, a lot of you comes into the desktop. I can show you what I do, and I'm going to do that, the different things that I'm using in my devotional desktop, and you can decide if that fits your personality or not, or what you like to do. If not, maybe you'll use something else and you'll do something different, and that's okay as well. But I do like to use a word processing document just kind of as a prayer list, and I'll usually have a prayer list right there. This is obviously not going to be my real prayer list. I did that for a while, and then people started asking me about the prayers on my prayer list, and I felt uncomfortable because there were some people's personal problems on there. So I had to just move to a generic one. But got a prayer list there. I also have a journal that I write in every day. So when I finish reading the word, whatever I've studied that day, I'll talk about it. Whatever I've prayed about, I'll put it in there, and I'll have my journal. I have a verse list that I use for memorization. So let's see here. What is that called? Verses 2. There it is. I have that open. Sometimes I'll be doing like a workbook as well. You know, if you're doing one of those like workbooks that come from the different study guides and stuff, they have workbooks that come with them. You can fill in the answers. Those will stay open too. So I have some of those sometimes. But you know, you can come up with some creative ideas of things maybe that you're using that work really well, and just will fit your specific, in this case, devotional style. You may say, well, I'll never write in a journal, or I don't memorize scripture off of the computer. I do it, by writing it on my hand, maybe, I don't know. But you may have different methods than I do. So maybe those things all won't work for you, but maybe some of those will work for you as well. So I'd encourage you to kind of think through a little bit on what do I need on my desktop as well. Now let's talk about finishing up a desktop. How do we finalize a desktop so that it's all ready to go? There's two things that we need to do whenever we're finalizing a desktop. Now, if you look at my screen right now, I got 6 windows opened up. This isn't a very usable desktop in the way that it is because it's little tiny boxes, okay? So we want to make sure that we're first off are using our window bar at the bottom by minimizing things down to it as we're not using them. So if I'm not currently using my verses to memorize, I can minimize it down to the bottom and it will hide down there, giving me more room to read. So anything I'm not actively using, I want to minimize down to that bottom. But before I do that, arrange it again. Before I do that, I want to take just a few moments, name each window. What is the purpose of that window? I'm going to put it in the name of it so that way later on when I'm coming back, I can know what the purpose of each window is. So if I'm adding new books in, I know where to add them. If I'm looking to study, I know where to study and how to go, okay? So to do that, I am going to right-click on the title bar of the window. So that's same bar that has the minimize, maximize, and close. I'm going to right-click on it, and it's going to allow me to enter custom captions. Okay, so I'm going to go through, I'm going to name each one of these. This one is my devotional reading window, so that's what I'm supposed to do in there, so that's what I'm going to type it as. Then I had my Bible window, so we'll name that. Then I had my helps window. And then, of course, you can do this with your documents as well. You can do it with your verse lists. And you can do it with your user books as well. And so now all of those buttons on the bottom are now named what I'm going to do in them. So it makes it a little easier to find out as well, especially when you talk about some of our books. Man, some of our books have some of the weirdest abbreviations. It's like the QABL 5, and I'm like, I have no idea what that stands for. Even looking at the book title, I can't figure it out. So sometimes they're weird. So naming the window can really be beneficial, especially if you combine like lots of categories together. It can really help you remember what you're doing in there. So that's the first thing. Name your windows, then minimize the windows that you're not actively using. The second thing then, make that template, okay? Take that picture so that way if you make a mistake, that picture has been taken and you can go back to it. So we're just going to go up to our desktops. We're going to click Create Template here. I'm going to name it. Again, I always name it the same, Devotions. And now I've got that picture taken. Now if I have any problems, I mess it up, I delete books off it on accident, I can restore them back really quick right to this spot and not have any problems. So that is the last step. Now it is ready to use. Now I can use it as much as I want. Any questions here about those final steps here or any other things about this desktop that we have been talking about?